3 days before the first race of the season, Red Bull made a decision that has the entire paddock whispering. Not a new car. Not a visible revolution. Something far more dangerous. Because according to internal leaks, the RB22 arriving in Australia is not faster in the way people expected. It is smarter. And in modern Formula One, smarter wins championships. Rival engineers have already labeled the Ford RB22 the efficiency benchmark after Bahrain. Top speed without clipping. Energy deployment that looks almost too clean. And now, just days before Melbourne, subtle software refinements tailored specifically for Albert Park's stop-and-go layout. No dramatic bodywork. No flashy announcement. Just recalibrated energy maps. Adjusted overtake logic. An aerodynamic fine-tuning designed to stay perfectly inside the FIA's new monitoring limits. Which is exactly why the FIA is watching closely. Because when a car does not need a major upgrade before the first Grand Prix, it means the real upgrade already happened. And here is the part nobody is saying out loud. If this optimized RB22 performs in Australia the way testing suggested, the psychological damage to Ferrari and Mercedes could begin in race 1. This is the season opener. The first signal. The first statement. And Verstappen is publicly downplaying his chances. But when has he ever shown his full hand before the lights go out? Subscribe now, because what Red Bull might reveal in Melbourne could define the entire championship before it truly begins. Everyone is waiting for a dramatic reveal in Melbourne. A new front wing. A radical rear suspension. Something obvious. Something visible. But that expectation is exactly what Red Bull is using to its advantage. Because the RB22 arriving in Australia is almost identical to the one we saw in Bahrain testing. And that is not a weakness. It is a warning. The extreme side pods are still there. That deep undercut philosophy, carved aggressively to push airflow toward the rear. The revised floor that already shocked rival engineers in testing. The refined rear end built to reduce drag without sacrificing stability. Nothing theatrical. Nothing desperate. Just a package that already looked complete. And here is why that matters. Most teams use the first race to understand their problems. Red Bull is using the first race to exploit their strengths. That difference is massive. Because when you are still solving balance issues, you cannot attack strategy. When you are still fighting tire degradation, you cannot control race pace. But the RB22 showed something in Bahrain that very few people are talking about. Consistency. Not a single explosive lap. Not a headline-grabbing number. Consistency over long runs. And in Albert Park, that is critical. This circuit punishes instability. It is stop and go. Heavy braking zones. Rapid direction changes. Traction-limited exits. If your rear end moves unpredictably, you lose tenths everywhere. If your energy deployment is uneven, you burn through tires defending. And this is where the Ford RB22 integration becomes central. Because the real refinement for Australia is not hardware. It is calibration. Energy maps tailored for repeated acceleration zones. Torque delivery shaped for smoother exits. Deployment adjusted to comply perfectly with the new FIA monitoring thresholds. That sounds technical. But it translates into something very simple. Control. And control wins season openers. But here is where things shift again. Verstappen has been unusually cautious in interviews. He says they still need a step forward. He says Ferrari and Mercedes may be closer than expected. He says victory is not guaranteed. On the surface, that sounds like realism. But strategically, it reduces pressure. It lowers public expectation. And it keeps rivals guessing. Because if Red Bull truly believed they were behind, would they really arrive in Australia without a visible upgrade? Or is the real confidence hidden in the fact that they did not need one? And this is the psychological layer most fans overlook.
When a team brings a massive upgrade to race 1, it signals urgency.
When a team brings refinement instead, it signals belief. Belief that the base concept is already strong enough. Belief that the performance ceiling has not even been reached. And if that belief is correct, Melbourne will not be about survival. It will be about control. But we have not even touched the most sensitive part of this story yet. Because the real tension is not just between Red Bull and Ferrari. It is between Red Bull and the regulatory spotlight. And that is where this situation becomes far more complex than a simple upgrade narrative. Now we enter the part nobody wants to talk about openly. Because when one team becomes the reference, scrutiny becomes inevitable. After Bahrain testing, quiet conversations began circulating through the paddock. Engineers comparing data traces. Teams analyzing speed traps. Energy deployment graphs being studied frame by frame.
And one pattern kept appearing.
The Ford RB22 was not just strong. It was clean.
No aggressive clipping at the end of straights.
No visible energy drop-off. No chaotic deployment spikes. Just smooth, sustained acceleration. And that kind of efficiency raises eyebrows. Not because it is illegal, but because it forces questions. How are they extracting that balance between power and control? How are they staying within the tighter FIA monitoring windows while still gaining on corner exit?
And here is where things become very delicate.
The FIA has increased attention on active aero transitions and energy release behavior. Overtake modes are no longer just about pressing a button. They are about how that energy is delivered. How sudden the delta becomes. How much of a speed difference appears over a short distance. If that spike is too sharp, it attracts attention. So Red Bull adapted. Not by reducing performance, by reshaping it. Instead of dramatic surges, the RB22 now appears to release power progressively. Instead of obvious jumps, the gain is layered. Harder to detect. Harder to question. Still effective. And this matters even more in Melbourne. Albert Park is not a power circuit like Monza. It rewards traction. Controlled acceleration. Energy availability at the end of the lap. Which means deployment timing becomes more important than raw peak output. And according to internal paddock whispers, that is exactly what Red Bull focused on for Australia. Not new parts. New logic. Refined torque curves for slower corners. Energy recovery optimized for repeated braking zones. Deployment adjusted to maintain consistency under the new regulatory lens. It sounds subtle. But subtle is where championships are built. Now imagine you are Ferrari. Or Mercedes. You see Red Bull arrive without a dramatic upgrade. You hear Verstappen downplaying expectations. You assume the gap might have closed. But then you analyze the telemetry on Sunday. And you realize something uncomfortable. The RB22 does not spike. It does not explode ahead. It simply keeps pulling. Lap after lap. Stint after stint. That is more intimidating than a single dominant qualifying lap. Because it suggests underlying stability. And stability is harder to disrupt.